Back here in the TVG studios, I am very pleased to be joined by a special guest on the line, Hall of Fame rider, the winner of 2 Kentucky Derbies, 5 Breeders' Cup Classics, and an analyst for ESPN and NBC, Jerry Bailey. Jerry, thanks so much for joining me. I'm sure you're quite busy this week.
Yeah, it's a fun busy though, Christina. You know, you get to see friends you haven't seen for a while, and you get to reminisce about things you done in the past. Speaking
of reminiscing, have you done any reminiscing with jockey Mike Smith? You both are currently tied in terms of all-time wins in the Breeders' Cup by a jockey with 15 apiece. He has 8 mounts this year. Do you think he might be standing atop that mountain on his own by Sunday?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance of it. And to be honest with you, I know it's a cliche, but Mike and I have been friends for a long, long time. Even when we were competitors, we were good friends. And he deserves it. I mean, he's a great rider, and you last this long at this high of a level, and you deserve everything you get, and I'm sure you'll get it done this weekend.
He's got some great mounts with Mucho Macho Man and Royal Delta. One of the wins for you, and it still goes down as the biggest upset in Breeders' Cup history, was for our Kong. We want to take a look back at that race. And I was reviewing, I have your book, and I kind of flipped through it once more this afternoon. What I did not realize or did not remember from when I read it was that our Kong was actually originally scheduled to be ridden by Mike Smith. He turned down the mount when Devil His Due was entered, and obviously that worked out for you.
Right. I mean, here's another side note you don't know. Devil Is Due cost Mike cigar as well, because Alan Jerkins decided to run him in the Naira Mile at the time, so Mike chose him. I got cigar. Same thing happened in this case. Mike had the commitment on our Kong. Alan Jerkins decided to run Devil Is Due, so Mike honored his commitment to Alan, and I got the mount on our Kong. So Devil Is Due was kind of costly for Mike.
Yeah, indeed. What do you remember about that day in terms of, you know, the entire experience? Riding a horse like our Kong, you don't know much about him, you get to the paddock, everyone's speaking French. You went in very blind with this horse.
I did, and I was always a student of the form and video, and I thought that was my biggest asset, how I could prepare for a race. And there was very, very little I could get from the racing form in terms of how he ran his races, because there's very little information. There's no fractional times, there's no position. They just gives you a brief comment. I couldn't find any videos, so I was really dependent on talking to trainer Andre Fabin in the paddock, and I couldn't find him. It was so crazy and so busy, and I thought, well, I'll just go to the labs with the horse, and they'll surely tell me how the horse's style is. And when I got there, they all spoke French, so I was pretty blank. It was kind of like a blank canvas when I got on the horse and headed for the track.
Huge payoff there with our Kong. That was definitely one of the biggest upsets we've seen in terms of the Breeders' Cup, and right there at Santa Anita, which will be back for racing this weekend. Jerry, when you were riding at this point in the week, what were you working on? What was going through your mind just trying to prepare for such a big event like the Breeders' Cup?
Well, it's difficult when it's not at your home-based track. And I was an Eastern rider and mostly in New York this time of year, so we would come out here, which would be a Wednesday, on the first race day of the week, which was typically a Wednesday when I rode. And you would hope to at least have 1 or 2 mounts on Wednesday and Thursday. And in most cases with me, it was only a one-day Breeders' Cup. So you were struggling to get mounts for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, just to get into the rhythm, to stay fit, and be at the top of your game for Breeders' Cup on Saturday. It's pretty much the same with these guys now, but they don't race on Wednesday, so they really only have Thursday, you know, to get in here and get a feel of Santa Anita and how the track's playing before they start on Friday.
Yeah, and with Hurricane Sandy, you know, a lot of these horses aren't going to have an opportunity to have much time over the track. Do you think for some of the New York-based horses, especially Todd Pletcher's group, Grace Hall, that came in very late, will they be affected by those travel plans in terms of how long it took them to get stall to stall and arriving so late?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a couple of issues, Christina. I don't think getting here late is a tremendous issue. It was the fact they couldn't train in New York. You know, they worked on Saturday to avoid the bad weather on Sunday. So they walked on Sunday, and because of the bad weather, they had to walk on Monday, Tuesday, and then today they didn't train because they got on a plane. So they missed 4 days of training. And now, Wise Dan wasn't the same case because he came out of Kentucky, and whoever else came out of Kentucky, they got to train all the way up. So I don't think it's nearly an issue for a horse like him as it would be for Todd Pletcher's other horses. And just in general, especially with 2-year-olds, it seemed like the West Coast always had the edge over the 2-year-olds from the East Coast when they shipped this way.
one of Todd Pletcher's 2-year-olds is Kauai Katie. I want to talk a little bit about the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies with you, Jerry. I know a horse that you're interested in is Beholder for Hall of Famer Richard Mandela. She'll break from the rail, and what was very interesting, he scratched her from the Chandelier, which was 2 turns at Santa Anita, would be the local prep for this race, being concerned about the distance. Now he enters her in the Juvenile Fillies. I'm not one to question Richard, but do you think that the distance will be a problem for her?
Well, I talked to him about this, and he really kind of intended on maybe going in the Chandelier if, and only if, she was training just out of her skin and really well, and she came back from Del Mar a little bit unsettled, he said. You know, a little bit unsettled in her mind, so he thought, you know, it's not probably the right thing to do if she's a little slidey right now and not exactly right to stretch her out off that. So that's why he decided to go back in the sprint race. But she exited the sprint race in such good form and so settled that he thought it was the right time to stretch her out now. And, you know, listen, she appears to be the fastest filly on paper, but it was such a huge effort. You know, can she duplicate, you know, a long race off that huge sprint race, especially with the amount of speed that's in there to go with her early, because she's pretty much committed to go to the lead from the rail, the way she is.
She's stuck on the inside.
Yeah, Kiowa Katie for Pletcher. Now, she started and went short, and then she went 3/4. And she went 6.5 rather, and then dropped back to 3/4 in the matron instead of stretching out to the mile of the Prisette. So you would think Todd's thinking is she's a sprinter, yet he enters her in the long race. So, and she's got the 8 post, so you know she's got it pretty much with Rosie, got to use the speed to get over going into the first turn. So I think the race is on early. I think there's a lot of speed in here. Even Executive Privilege, according to Baffert, doesn't like to be grabbed and taken a hold of and wrestled back. So she's going to be up close, too. I mean, there's just going to be a ton of speed in this race.
Yeah, talking about, you know, having to grab a horse and take them back with Kauai Katie and Rosie Napravnik aboard, I think she might have her work cut out for her. She did relax off of one horse by about a length in the matron, but that was going 1 turn. You have that long run down the backstretch. She's sitting on the outside. For this race, going into that first turn, if you grab her, she might get a little unsettled and sort of headstrong, and as you say, really engage Beholder or anybody else who wants to be involved early.
It's a good point because, I mean, not only was she up close at Belmont, but she was up close at 3/4 going like 45 for the first half or 45 and change. So, yeah, she's just naturally quick. The only thing with horses that you're trying to rate, the first turn, the first time they do it, will slow them down. I mean, they have to slow down to turn, most generally. So a lot of times it'll catch, especially a young horse, by surprise. And if they're going to be effective going from short to long, it's going to be the first time.
It will be.
They don't know how far they have to run, and then that first turn kind of slows them down. So I don't think it's going to make her last. I don't think she has a chance of lasting, but it might give Rosie a chance to slow her down for a little bit.
It will be the first time for many of these horses not on Lasix, and Executive Privilege is one of those. She is the favorite at 2-1 on the morning line. Jerry, there's been some buzz about her last few works that maybe they, you know, didn't work her on Lasix, and then she wasn't quite as sparkling in the mornings without the medication as she has been in the afternoon. Is that a concern for you with her and really any of the 2-year-olds this weekend?
Well, I mean, they all have to do it, but I mean, to your point, I didn't know that she didn't work on Lasix, so that might be the reason. Baffert said that the reason she didn't work well is because Raphael was trying to grab her and slow her down a little bit, and thus she locked on, kind of drifted out, and didn't finish well. You know, I don't know whether I believe that story or not. You know, trainers try and camouflage works a lot. Baffert wouldn't be the first guy. But I just didn't like the way she looked at Del Mar. I think when she won here in the Chandelier, she got away with murder on the front end at 1/2-48 on a track that nobody was closing on. So she had everything her own way that day, and I think everything's going to be against her on Saturday, or on Friday, rather.
She is the morning line favorite, 2-1. One other race that I want to talk to you about a little bit, Jerry, is the Breeders' Cup Mile on Saturday. It'll go as the 11th race on the program just before the Breeders' Cup Classic. There's a horse in here coming over from overseas at Celebration, and you look through his past performances, overall 8 for 14 with 4 seconds, but a lot of those seconds come behind Frankel, highest rated horse in the world. Does Celebration have a lot on his shoulders in terms of validating Frankel and all of the hyperbole and the, you know, best horse in the world rankings that we've given Frankel already?
Well, I think without a doubt that comparisons are going to be drawn between, you know, our horses, maybe Wise Dan and Frankel, based upon how Celebration runs. And I think it might be a little unfair, and I'm going to tell you why. Celebration just ran a tremendous race at ASCOT. You know, a big effort in that race. Now, 2 weeks back, he comes to run in the Breeders' Cup after having to ship as well. I just can't see that he can bring his top race, a race like he ran at ASCOT, back in 2 weeks. I just don't see how he does it. So he is a very good horse, and he may win, but I don't think it's going to be his best effort. And although he could win, I don't think he will, because I think Wise Dan is the best horse in training in the United States right now.
It seems like sometimes, the Aidan O'Brien horses, the Breeders' Cup might be an afterthought. They go through their entire program overseas and then they say, well, let's just get one more run in and send him to the Breeders' Cup. And they really are up against it with all that traveling and the hard campaign they have. What about Wise Dan overall? I mean, he's just been so sensational this year. If he were to win it and we did get some sort of crazy price horse in the Classic, could Wise Dan be Horse of the Year?
Oh God, I had him #1 half the year. I have him #2 right now. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I got Game On Dude in front of him, but not by much. But look at Christina. If this horse could be favored in 4 different races in the Breeders' Cup, if you were able to enter him, he could conceivably be co-favored with Game On Dude. In fact, I would have liked him in the Breeders' Cup Classic. He is favored, or probably should be favored, in the mile on the grass. He would be favored in the dirt mile. He probably would be favored in the sprint down the hill. It's just inconceivable that one horse could be favorite in 4 different Breeders' Cup races. That's how much people think of this horse.
He is. He's an absolute beast. I'm looking forward to the mile. There's a lot of storylines in there with Animal Kingdom coming back and everything else. Jerry, thanks so much for taking some time today. I know it's a busy week for you, and see you out at Santa Anita in the next couple days.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you. Hall of Famer Jerry Bailey on the line with us there to give his insight. And he makes some great points in terms of the training of the horses from New York that have had to wait and walk the shed row quite a few days with regard to the weather there, and then take the long trip out here. And Acceleration coming back very quickly. He will take a lot of money. Same thing.